Okay. Hello, everybody. This is George C.L.C. Samuels, and you are tuning into another session of our Faiaside chat series. I have a very special guest today, the Honorable Minister Simon Kofe. He is the Honorable Minister of Justice, Communications, and Foreign Affairs. But we'll be going over a few things today, a little bit about Simon and his career history, what he's been up to date, the Tuvalu National Digital Ledger project, and then also things that Simon is looking at in terms of the vision and the future of Tuvalu. So to get us started, Simon, welcome to the show.
Thank you, George. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Now, you are tuning in from Tuvalu, right? And for those who are listening in and who haven't heard of Tuvalu, do you want to just give a little description of where in the world Tuvalu is?
Yeah, Tuvalu is it's halfway between Australia and Hawaii. That's probably the reference point that most people are familiar with. We are the fourth smallest country in the world in terms of land area. In terms of population, I think we're probably one of the smallest. We have about 12,000 people in Tuvalu.
Yep. And so you are now working with the Tuvalu government, but your career history, spans law, a few different areas, and would love to just maybe start with your own career history, how you got started and,
Yep.
and how that ended up you working with the Tuvalu government.
Okay. Well, I actually left at a young age. My father is an economist by profession, so he worked in the government for a while, and he resigned after he was secretary to government. And we moved to Fiji. He was teaching in the University of the South Pacific, so I attended school there.
Yep.
In Fiji for a couple of years, and then we moved again to New Caledonia, where he worked for the SPC, and then again to Vanuatu, and then sometime in Australia as well. So I kind of moved around the region a lot because of his work.
Yeah.
But I did a law degree in Vanuatu. That's the University of the South Pacific. Law branch is in. So after completing my studies in Vanuatu, I set the bar in Fiji in 2005, and I worked as a lawyer in private practice in Fiji for a few years. And after that, I finally made my way back to Tuvalu and worked for the Attorney General's office, the People's Lawyer, legal aid as well, which is, we call it here, the People's Lawyer, and then as a senior magistrate. And that was my last job before I made the switch to politics.
Wow. And what took you back to Tuvalu, right? Like, why didn't you want to stay in Fiji or outside of Tuvalu?
Yeah, that's a good question, because all my siblings are actually in Australia right now.
Yeah.
And they're all saying, why don't you want to come to Australia or move to to New Zealand with other families? But I've always had this desire to come back home and to really contribute to nation building. And I think what kind of inspired me was that my grandparents, although we moved around, they were also with us in all these different places that we moved around in the region.
Wow.
And I think it was just that connection and the stories that they tell. That's kind of where I draw my inspiration to come back to Tuvalu and contribute. So that's how I came back.
Right. I mean, that's really fascinating, because I know, I guess, a lot of our parents or grandparents, they all moved out of Tuvalu for better opportunities, right? And for a lot of our listeners, they're not very familiar with what happens in the Pacific and why people move to certain places. So for those who are listening, why is Fiji usually a next logical step in terms of traveling to? Would you be able to share?
Well, Fiji is the only, I guess, international port that we go through to go out into the world. So we only fly to Fiji, and then from Fiji we move on to other places. But Fiji is also the hub of the Pacific. That's where the regional university headquarters is. A lot of the regional organizations are based in Fiji. So a lot of our Tuvalu nationals go to Fiji for education and also for work opportunities as well. And then obviously the next step would be to New Zealand and Australia.
Yep. And, you mentioned sort of being inspired by your grandparents. I love hearing that because, my inspirations also in terms of even connecting with you, right, through the TNDL project, which we'll talk about soon, was very similar. Stories that my mom told me growing up, and then, connection to my grandmother. Being someone who's also lived overseas, I haven't even set foot in Tuvalu yet, but there is, or kind of has been, something calling back, right, to give back. And for you, what were some of the things growing up that really made you want to return and do something?
I think the thing that my grandfather used to reminisce about a lot, he said that, back home, life is so simple. And although they did not have, the technology and everything that we had access to outside of Tuvalu, he said it was the relationships that they had with the people, with the families. And he thought that is probably the most rewarding thing for him in life. Although he's probably one of the few people in his generations who left Tuvalu because he had the opportunity to, but he always desired to come back. They lived the later part of their life in Australia, but they always wanted to come back. That seed that was planted in me at those early stage, that really kind of, I want to go back. I want to, learn the culture and get connect with the people and do something.
Fascinating. And so, yeah, it's so fascinating, the ancestral call, right? Or like, the influence that our parents or grandparents have on us. And, have you come across other Tuvaluans as well, right, who have, gone overseas, who also want to come back and do something?
Yeah, I mean, with technology now, like yourself and others from Tuvalu that are living overseas who've gone in search of better opportunities. Now they can contribute to Tuvalu. They can contribute to nation building remotely. You don't necessarily have to set foot here.
Yeah.
But you can see the heart, you can see the desire in them, that they're so willing to contribute, to spend some time to come online and share ideas and provide their advice. So there's actually a lot of them. And I try
you're doing a good job
that we have to.
Yeah. You're doing a really good job of that. And that's something I definitely admire and respect about you. You in my eyes, you're very much a trailblazer, for the nation and the government. And, on the bit around, I guess, our culture, what do you think, the Tuvaluan culture or maybe even the Pacific culture has to sort of teach, the outside world? Because you and I have both been exposed to the outside world, right? And what's happening with all the progress, but the simple life. Yeah. What do you think that has as a lesson for others?
I think it's because obviously if you're looking at what Tuvalu can offer the world, the thing I'm looking at is the philosophies and the principles that underpins community life. About respect, because here we value respect, we value cooperation. We're looking at ensuring that there's harmony inside of community, inside of families.
Yeah.
And so I feel that the world, because of globalization, we've become so interconnected that we are in fact a community. You can't do things in isolation without affecting another part of the world. So I feel that the world has come to that place where we are so interconnected that we are a community. But yet the attitude and the perception of people are still operating in individualism. Nations pulling their own interests and not considering the greater good. And so I see the philosophies that underpin community life in Tuvalu and other places in the Pacific as being the solution for how to live in harmony in the world today. And we've actually trying to advocate that through our foreign policy that we launched last year, looking at the greater good. How do you balance your national interest with the interest of everyone else as part of the world? And issues like climate change is a perfect example of that. that we all sharing in the same environment, that here in Tuvalu is the same that in other parts of the world. So it's something that really, I think leadership is an important part of it. Leaders really need to start kind of shifting their paradigm from primarily focusing on the individual and the nation interest and looking at the bigger picture.
What are some of the challenges you face like already, right, in terms of being able to shift these paradigms, or even within Tuvalu, right? Like, because some of the things you share, I'm sure isn't always so popular with everybody. So what are some of the challenges you face so far that you can share?
Well, it's always hard to change mindsets, and I understand that it's not something that is overnight, but there needs to be champions within our communities to be able to model that and demonstrate that yes, we can do something, we can change, we can shift the way we think. But I think from a leadership position, part of my role is to bring people alongside the journey. It makes no sense if I'm running 10 steps ahead and everyone's right at the back. And so I think the challenge for leadership is to inspire people and to bring people on board. But I'm using, for example, I talked about our foreign policy last year. I actually used the consultation process as a tool to reach out to people and to kind of really, hammer down the message that Tuvalu does have something to offer. We don't always have to look at ourselves as vulnerable, always, drawing the sympathy of other nations because of climate change. We actually have things that we can offer. And that's why I was talking about culture in the foreign policy and saying, listen, this is actually the solution for a lot of the problems that we have in the world. So you can see their eyes light up, some really grasping that and saying, hey, we do have something. And I think once you instill that in people, that the sense of significance, the sense that they can offer something, it really goes a long way in changing the way they see themselves and how they see their world.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that reminds me of places like South Korea. They have very strong cultural exports with their K-pop, their music, right? And it makes me think about, for Tuvalu, right, as these cultural elements as like cultural assets in a way. I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens over the next couple of decades with, even some of the things that we're working on. So you were talking about the foreign policies. Wondering if we could expand on that a bit in terms of, what are some examples of things that you've implemented in the foreign policy that embed, these cultural elements?
Yeah, so in the policy, we've actually we've using some of the cultural concepts. For example, the concept is the concept where people living in close proximity, like your neighborhood, and the way we live in our neighborhood. You look out for your neighbors. You when you have resources, you share with your neighbors, and you always have that sense of community. So we're using local concepts like those and putting it in our policy. The Kaitasi policy, Kaitasi concept, sorry. Yeah. Kaitasi is the clans where everyone have a collective interest in land, a shared interest. And so we're bringing those up and putting it in our policy and saying that this is how we actually have to, we can make the world a better place as a region and as a world. So yes, those are some of the things that we're putting in our policy, and also looking at how we can also contribute on the international sphere in terms of how we promote some of these values on the international level. And also issues, there's a strong issue around climate change and statehood. Obviously with climate change and sea level rise, that threatens our statehood and how international law defines a state at this time. So those are some of the aspects of in the foreign policy.
Okay, yeah. Just on the climate change front as well, for those who are listening in, do you want to maybe just share a little bit about on the Tuvalu front, but then also more importantly, right, how that is connecting in with some of the, future initiatives that can hopefully turn, the narrative around of being, as you said, like a helpless nation to actually being able to do more for, for Tuvalu.
Mm. Yep. Well, Tuvalu is considered one of the first countries to be affected by climate change and sea level rise, given that we're atolls, we're little islands, no mountains, and so Tuvalu is one of the first countries that's probably gonna go underwater. And scientists are making that prediction that within 50 or so years, that Tuvalu could be underwater. And so those are the challenges that we are facing. But I think, I guess some of the benefits that come out of that is that it's kind of put Tuvalu on the map. We've become very visible on the international plane. And as soon as you say Tuvalu, people immediately link that with the sinking islands. But it's important I think for us from our perspective is not to allow that to kind of push us into a box and just we're vulnerable, we need help, but to use that space as to how we can promote our values, how we can demonstrate technologies that we're implementing in Tuvalu.
Yeah. That's a very interesting point. Obviously, there's a lot of politics around climate change itself, right? Some people believe that nothing's going to happen to Tuvalu. Others are like, oh my God, yeah, we're going to sink. And there's so many campaigns. I've seen, a lot of youth around the world, campaigning on behalf of Tuvalu, as well. Sort of what do you see right now as sort of like the realities and, I guess, what you're looking at over the next maybe a couple of decades? Or let's say 10 years, next 10 years, a couple of decades is a while out.
Yeah, well, I think technology is a big part of what our priorities are right now.
Yeah,
I had a specific interest to take the communications portfolio because I see technology as the future for Tuvalu.
Yeah,
and it is I guess it's the only sphere that we're not limited by the physical environment that we live in.
Yeah.
Because every time we talk about economics, we talk about trade, the reports are saying Tuvalu is too small, Tuvalu is too far from the market. So, you face these physical limitations, but when you make that switch to the cyber world, there's no time, there's no space. The potential is there for us to grow. So I've always had that keen interest in technology as a way we can kind of bridge the gap or even leapfrog in terms of our development and technologies that we use.
Yeah, love it. And what have been some of the challenges you face on the maybe the technology infrastructure side of things for Tuvalu?
Obviously, the infrastructure in Tuvalu is a big challenge, partly because of the climate as well. Infrastructure and things that we set up here deteriorate quite quickly. And also having the expertise locally to be able to maintain these things locally. So those are some of the challenges that we're facing. How are we overcoming that? Obviously, there's a number of ways we can do that. I think the project that we're working on at the moment, the Tuvalu National Digital Ledger, we're exploring a public blockchain as a way to overcome some of those challenges that we're facing locally.
Yeah, so that might be a good segue into the TNDL project itself. So maybe let's go back, to give people some context. Yeah, so maybe let's go to like how we met. If you recall, how we met and what you read at the time.
Yeah. I first came to learn of you, George, through an article that you wrote. But prior to that, I had watched some of the cartoons that you had created, some of those Nanome Island. I watched those, but I did not know who actually created them. But after I read your article, and I think one of your relatives is also a minister, and so I had a discussion with him. Timmy. I spoke to Timmy about the article. We were talking, and he said, "Oh, that's his relative," and so he got us connected, and that's how we met.
Ended up, yep. And so for those who are watching or listening in, I'll put in a link to that article. But what were some of the things that stood out for you, I guess, in terms of that plan? Because you guys are essentially, doing the things that were laid out in that plan already. And I know that, of course, you already have a vision for Tuvalu as well. So, yeah, I guess what things stood out, and yeah, how did that connect in with what you're seeing for Tuvalu?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, some of these things were sorry, things that we're working on as well, and there were things that were in my mind as well at the time. You mentioned .tv in your article, and it was something that was, I guess, keeping me up at nights, thinking about how we're gonna, look at rearranging that asset that we have. So and to think that it was a Tuvaluan who published it, and I was thinking, well, there's another Tuvaluan out there who's kind of thinking the same things as well, and looking at how we can advance in technology. So I think that's where the connection, to find someone who like-minded, who is also considering the same things.
Exactly. And I find it so important, right? Obviously there's only so many thousands of us Tuvaluans, in the world, whether directly or, through family and stuff. And I love the fact that the internet pretty much has enabled us to connect, and bring that knowledge together to actually do something. So I'll give some context as well for those who are listening in. .tv, Tuvalu is actually the owner of the .tv top level domain. It has been since, what has it been, the 90s?
Late 90s.
Yep. So since the late 90s. And in the article I was just writing about how, because the .tv renewal is coming up, right? At the end of this year or early next year?
Yeah, end of this year.
Okay. And in the article I had said that to get a really good price for .tv, it might be good to explore opening it up to a bidding war, right? Which means that you could have, multiple companies or vendors actually compete to see who would pay the highest price. But then that allows Tuvalu to actually be able to set the price, or at least have more power in the negotiations.
Yeah.
So, yeah, knowing that and looking at how you could better leverage the .tv asset, that does take us into sort of your digital transformation efforts for Tuvalu and the going cashless. So yeah, what were the motivations for the cashless side of things, or at least reducing the use of paper, right, and manual processes?
Thank you. And obviously it's because of the problems and challenges that we have. Tuvalu is made up of 8 island communities scattered in a very vast ocean. And so the only way to get to these other places is by boat, and it can take anything from 8 hours to 24 hours. So it's the geography itself poses a challenge for sending things to different parts of the country. And we also have problems with, we don't have credit card facilities in Tuvalu. So traveling overseas has always been a challenge for any Tuvaluan, obviously, because overseas you need a credit card to check into hotels and to purchase things. Even shopping online is a big challenge for us in Tuvalu. So we know that there's a technology out there. There's technology out there to address these issues, and that kind of set us off on our journey to explore and to find what is out there that can fix this problem we have.
Yep, exactly. So yeah, it's good that when we were talking about the cashless aspect and leveraging blockchain technology, this kind of ties in. The more that we got involved with the project, I noticed, there are geopolitical issues for Tuvalu to also be aware of. So what are some of the things that, Tuvalu has to consider, right, when doing any sort of new technology rollout? Because it's not as just, it seems like it's not as simple as just, switching on new technology. You guys seem to have to, really worry about other things as well. Because yeah, you've got China, right? And I can share that story about your very ballsy rejection of their funds. But yeah, maybe just commenting on the geopolitical side.
Yeah, so Tuvalu has diplomatic ties with Taiwan, and there's only 4 countries in the Pacific now that still maintain ties with the Taiwan. It's Tuvalu, Nauru, Marshall Islands, and Palau. Last year, I think last year or the previous year, Solomon Islands and Kiribati had made the switch from Taiwan to China, mainland China. So that was quite a shakeup in geopolitics in the Pacific.
Yeah.
And obviously, there's always a growing pressure on the few of us that are still remaining with Taiwan to also make that switch. So it's quite challenging. And as you said, with technology, there's also a competition that is going on between the superpowers as well on that.
Yeah.
One perfect example is the submarine cable.
So what's happening there?
Nauru.
Been hearing about
I'll give you
this.
the example of Nauru. I'll give you the example of Nauru first before I just touch on where we are in Tuvalu. But Nauru also has a submarine cable project funded by the ADB, Asian Development Bank. And so they're at a stalemate right now because Huawei had won the bid for the submarine cable. And Huawei being a Chinese-based company was a big problem for Nauru because of the affiliation with Taiwan.
Yeah.
And so Nauru had raised issues of security issues and geopolitical issues. So that put a big stall on the project. So I see that as also being that might also be a problem for Tuvalu moving forward. Obviously, we have a submarine cable at the moment funded by the World Bank.
Yeah.
But I also see that there will be competition from Chinese-based companies as well to bid for that project. So those are some of the geopolitics.
So how does that work as well? So are there multiple bids that take place while the project is going, or are you talking about? It's because for Tuvalu, right? If the World Bank already has bidded, right? Have they won that, or is it still open for bidding?
So the funding, the World Bank actually just provides the funding,
right?
And so they put a tender out for companies to bid for the construction of the cable.
Got it.
So it's that bidding it's the tender process that then you have multiple companies that also bid for the construction. So there are American-based companies. There's a French Alcatel is one of the major ones as well.
Yep.
But again, it comes down, these banks don't discriminate against countries because they're all members. All these countries are members of World Bank and Asian Development Bank, so they follow their processes and their procurement procedures. But what can you do when you get a bid that's very low? It's difficult to. So that's what Nauru is facing, and then we'll probably face the same problem as well.
Okay, so yeah, this is I think definitely why I was thinking applying sort of more entrepreneurial thinking to some of the problems that you guys have right now, because it seems like obviously from a government standpoint, political standpoint, it's almost like Tuvalu is beholden to a lot of these large, well-known institutions, right? And there aren't that many options for you to go to, when it comes to the funding side of things. So yeah, by increasing, I guess, maybe the local digital savviness, right? And from an entrepreneurial standpoint, do you think there is opportunities for Tuvaluans as well to, leverage, this new tech, come up, with some, I guess, entrepreneurial ventures that might also be an alternative funding source, for a lot of these projects, infrastructure projects.
Yeah, and definitely, and that's the kind of mindset that I have is to really look at how Tuvalu can generate its own wealth, its own revenue.
Yeah.
Because obviously, if you're too dependent on your development partners and donors, you're not really independent, because these things come with conditions and policies that need to be followed, and so we're quite restricted in what we can actually do. And so I have this my vision is that we were able to generate our own funds. And we're exploring that, and I think that, as you said, there's opportunities out there in the tech world. But right now I'm focusing a lot on .tv as well. I think we can really cash in on that if we negotiate that deal properly.
Well, yep.
But I mean, if you think about the domain industry, the domain space, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Yes.
And we have a major asset in that, and there are no Tuvaluans that are kind of really entering that space, and it's something that I'm really kind of encouraging our local IT experts to start looking into this space, because this is something that we can actually generate a lot of revenues. And I think it's just an attitudinal change, because a lot of people think that you have to go and study for so and so years and you come back and work. And I said, listen, we're living in the information age. Information is at the click of a finger. You can educate yourself and become an expert without even going through that process.
Yes.
And so I'm trying to instill that in the people, that you can educate yourself. I mean, I don't have any IT background. But I go on YouTube, I do searches to educate myself in these things, and people can do the same thing.
Exactly. No, you're 100% right, because there's definitely been a shift in the culture. If you look at sort of the younger generation now too, right? I mean, there are these like 16-year-old TikTokers, who are earning like millions before even graduating from high school. There was the Polynesian guy that TikTok track that everybody was dancing to.
The siren.
Yes, exactly.
The siren.
Yeah. I mean, that's right there, culture, right? So when I was seeing this, like, I was very excited. Some people are like, this is not a real job, or it's not, those are just like a rarity. But in many ways, like, this is the information age, as you said. There's like almost no excuse. If you have a mobile phone and you can access Facebook, you can teach yourself anything. There's so many free courses from major universities. Twitter, right? I mean, for me, it's interesting. Twitter has been a very interesting learning ground, because once you start connecting with the right experts, they're constantly putting out knowledge and wisdom that points you in the right direction, of where to look and where to read things. And even in the blockchain space, personally, I don't have, a degree or a master's in blockchain technology. However, because I started in the Bitcoin space in like 2013, just started, using it, experimenting, talking to other experts, just learning, in the trenches, I've discovered that I've ended up learning a lot more than some of the theoretical academic people, because, we're dealing with applications in the real world versus just, theory. And so, and it's also a very young space, right? So even universities, as they try to catch up, they can still be lag in terms of their knowledge, right? Because things are changing, right? Understanding is changing. So, yeah, looking now, so we talked about some of the geopolitics. We looked at your career, and around, I guess, the TNDL project. What are you hoping to see, to get out of it, right? Like, what are you most excited about this particular project in terms of what it could do for Tuvalu? What do you see? What's your vision there?
Yeah, I think one of the things I'm excited about is that on one level, it provides a platform for all our applications nationwide to be kind of built on the same platform. Because at the moment, although we're a small government, each department, each ministry, we're operating in silos. Everyone kind of doing their own thing, and businesses, storing their own data in somewhere that we probably don't know in terms of security, whether it's safe.
Yeah.
So on the one level, it's I'm excited about that. We're finally going to have something that can be the basis, the foundation of what we can build on top of it. And obviously the blockchain technology, I think it's revolutionary. Just reading about it and learning more about it has kind of really given me an understanding that this is going to be the future for the world in terms of technology and moving forward. But I'm excited because it's going to provide solutions for the people, because ultimately these things need to benefit the people on the ground, need to benefit from it.
Exactly.
But I've also have an eye as well on how this can be a prototype for other countries in the Pacific, and that's also something that excites me as well.
Yeah.
So on I guess on multiple levels, it's going to be very exciting working on this project.
Exactly. And I think that's what I appreciate about you, is that, going into a project like this also is a leap of faith. Tuvalu is probably, one of the few countries in the world that's sort of, stepping all the way in on this type of endeavor. We see a lot of countries exploring blockchain technology and also, central bank digital currencies, right? So I guess as a lawyer, right, or someone with legal background, how do you see things from that perspective, right? From a law standpoint with this type of technology, but also seeing how other countries are trying to explore it as a central bank digital currency. I know you've been thinking about this on multiple levels.
Yeah, I guess on the legal side, technology seems to be always ahead, and our laws are not really moving at the same pace. And those are some of the things that we're discussing right now with our ICT policies, is how can we get our legislations updated to be able to not only recognize the technology, but also have security and protection for our citizens as well, and to allow courts to be able to recognize this sort of digital assets and technology. I think blockchain, I think there's a lot of competition out there as well. There's a lot of rivalries on that. And, I guess one of the things that really drew my attention to BSV is the vision that it's looking at the utility of it, being able to be used for day-to-day, and not just being focused on the actual cryptocurrency aspect of it, or Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Which I think other platforms are very much focused on in that space. But we're hoping that this project can demonstrate the true potential of blockchain and how it can be used to benefit individuals on a day-to-day basis.
Exactly. Okay, so I guess a few final questions, and then we'll go into some of the questions from the users on Twitter. Over the next, say, 5 years, what sort of things are you seeing occurring, maybe just in terms of trends right now in the Pacific, right? And where Tuvalu can position itself for what you're seeing in general? Because it's really interesting. I've been noticing that there's been a lot of talk around almost like a united Pacifica identity. I'm hearing a lot of this from, New Zealand and Fiji. There's some conflicts between, the Melanesians and Polynesians, interestingly. So, yeah, where do you see, Tuvalu positioning itself, and also just general things that you're seeing coming, and it may be outside of, blockchain and the stuff we've talked about.
I said earlier that we launched our foreign policy last year, towards the end of last year, and it kind of coincided with a lot of the issues that are happening now in the region. We have the Micronesian group pull out of the Pacific Island Forum.
Yeah, what happened there actually? For those who aren't familiar, might need to explain the PI, Pacific Island Forum, and then also what exactly happened. Yeah.
Right. Well, the Pacific Island Forum is obviously the organization that all Pacific Island countries are a member of, including Australia and New Zealand. They're also part of the forum.
That's interesting.
And the position of Secretary General of the forum is elected by the leaders every 4 years that they do. but there's been a general understanding, or we say a gentleman's agreement, that the position is rotated amongst the three ethnicity groups: Polynesia, Micronesia, and Melanesia. And so, yeah, and so the Micronesia was of the view that it was their turn to hold that position. And other members thought, well, it's not a written law, it's not written in the rules.
Oh, that's a bit
it didn't really,
weird.
yeah. So I mean, so you could see where Micronesia is coming from.
Yeah,
you know,
100%.
losing out on that. So they pulled out. They pulled out of the forum earlier this year after that happened, and so we're trying to kind of find a way to get them back, to negotiate how they can become brought back to the table. Yeah. And Tuvalu is actually the chair of the forum at this time.
Oh wow!
And so we are we're the referee in the middle, trying to find a way to get everyone back together.
Wow. I mean, yeah, that is very unfortunate. And I guess this goes to show too, right? Like when you just sort of trust people's word, and then that it doesn't. What a shame! What a shame!
And that it comes back to the point that I was raising about in our foreign policies, is that we're losing our values. Our values, it's like we know how to apply them at home in our community setting, but when you come into the foreign affairs space, you completely forget those values, and you drive your interests, and so I thought that the launching of that policy was very timely as well, and a reminder to our brothers in other parts of the Pacific, that don't lose the Pacific way. It's the way we've lived. It's something that is familiar to us. We don't have to think in a different way when we're coming at that level. So it's a challenge. It's a big challenge, I think. But I think if we can stay true to our values, we probably can find a way through that.
Yeah, and I guess this is one of the I don't know if it's a downside, but what happens, right, with the mixing of cultures too, right? Because there's obviously, you and I have both been exposed to Western culture. And as we know, it's very individualistic. And, if you look at even economics, right, it's very individually driven, individual property rights, land rights. Everybody is driven by essentially self-interest at the end of the day. Do you see that as a hard one? Do you see that as a problem moving forward, or something that we can blend with?
It's a hard, because it's. I think if you take it down to its elements, it's human nature. It's human nature at the heart of it, because we have a conscience. We have a conscience that tells us the right thing to do. But then there's also a part of us that is focused on self, and that's how it manifests itself on all levels. Because nations are people, and nations behind nations are leaders, and that's just how they behave. But I think for Tuvalu, obviously we can't control how people respond to certain things. But what we are in control of is ourselves, and how we conduct ourselves in that space, and hopefully can set a standard for others that doesn't always have to be about yourself. We in our culture, the Pacific way, we value community, and so sometimes we need to kind of humble ourselves or bend down to give a hand to our brother. So I think that's the attitude that I'm approaching it with. I try not to put expectations on things that I'm not in control of. Otherwise, I'll end up with gray hair by the time I finish my term in office.
Or maybe no hair, from ripping it out all the time.
No hair. That's right.
Okay. So I got a few questions from Twitter, so I'll just go through maybe 3 of them. All right. So one I've got here, Aloha Honorable Simon Kofe. This looks like a fellow Polynesian on Twitter. Tuvalu's best resource is your educated population and natural ocean commodities. Is there a vision to keep these important resources invested and nurtured? Best regards, at Polystock.
Yeah, I totally agree, especially with the fisheries.
Yeah.
Tuvalu actually generates about 40, almost 50% of our revenue from the fishing sector,
Yeah, it's
and
large.
that's purely through licensing. And they're saying that that's probably about 10% of what these companies are actually making from our resources. So
Mm.
I always feel that, you know, the only way is for Tuvaluans to harvest their own fish is for us to break into the industry. And I mean that's part of the vision of the government, our government as well, is looking at ways we can break into that. Yeah, our people as well. I think you were talking about the cybersecurity space. I mean the cyberspace, and how Tuvalu can also be look at opportunities, job opportunities that we can operate remotely. We don't
Yeah.
necessarily have to leave Tuvalu now to work.
Exactly. Yeah.
We can work on the beach. We can have our laptop on our laps and on the beach somewhere in Tuvalu, and
Yep.
communicating to the rest of the world.
Yep, exactly. I mean, other people are wanting to come into Tuvalu now as a result of COVID in many ways, which is very fascinating, which is actually the second question from somebody. What does it take to become a citizen of Tuvalu currently?
Right. There are a few categories of citizenship under our laws at the moment. One, obviously, if you're a citizen by birth or by descent. The other is by marriage. So if you find a partner in Tuvalu, that could be a
Okay,
pathway
find a
for you.
Tuvaluan wife for this guy.
And thirdly is by naturalization. So you reside in
Mm.
Tuvalu for 7 years, and then you'll be eligible for citizenship.
Interesting. And why the 7 years? Is that just a number that you guys came up with, or?
That's a good question. It's just a number that's in the law at the moment that I'm not too sure what the rationale is behind that.
Might be time for review. Who knows?
Yeah.
Okay, and then the other question that we got here, actually, before we go into the last question here, I read recently that Tuvalu, along with some other neighboring countries, recently did something pretty innovative with in the fisheries, where I think you guys started charging by day, and people had to start bidding by time for tuna.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what it is previously we had given license to companies, and they just fish. They come and fish, and that license lasts for a year.
Yeah.
But in 2010, 2011, the Pacific, what they call it, the PNA, the parties to the Nauru Agreement, they came up with a scheme. They call it the vessel day scheme.
Yeah.
So instead of purchasing a license where you fish for 1 year, you actually purchasing a day. So the price of the day now is $10,000 US.
Huh.
So
Interesting.
you buy. So the moment you enter our EEZ, your time starts, and then the moment you leave, your time stops. And that has really increased our revenue, but it's also a conservation measure as well, because we're limiting the number of days we sell.
Yeah.
There's a lot of science behind it. There's science behind it that looks at what is the sustainable level of catch, and they kind of convert that into days, historical catch. So it's a very innovative approach to it, and we've seen our revenue increase significantly.
Great. And were you guys suffering, I guess, because I know that overfishing is a big issue for like the fishing industry or fisheries industry, like globally, right? Was Tuvalu suffering from any effects of overfishing?
I think in the world, the Pacific is probably the healthiest stock because of the conservation and management measures that we apply.
That's good to know.
Because since we've introduced this vessel day scheme, what it has done is actually pushed out a lot of fishing companies, and it's mainly the bigger companies now that are more efficient and that are still in the industry.
Yeah.
So I think we're doing a good job in that space, and it's I always like to use the fishing example as one of the things that has forced the Pacific to work together. collaborate and to come up with measures that benefits, because it's a resource that doesn't stay in one EEZ. The fish does not see these boundaries that we draw.
Exactly, arbitrary boundaries.
Yeah. And so the Pacific, those sorts of things has forced us to work together. And I see that as also with COVID now occurring in every part of the world is forcing us to collaborate and find ways to work together, which hopefully is the outcome of this.
Exactly. Okay, and then the final question here, what has been done to date with the announcement of the TNDL project, and how have the locals embraced the project so far? Yeah, feel free to share on that, and obviously I can add on that as well.
Yeah, obviously we went through a discovery phase, looking at two things. I think the first is a citizenship process, digitizing that, and also looking at the mobile money. And I think there was a prototype application that was developed. Yeah, we've been very excited. I think the people that have seen those prototypes have also been very excited. People are looking forward to having a mobile money app that was presented. And so, yeah, we're quite excited about that.
Yep. And yeah, just to add to that, the prototypes that we worked on were the front-end user interfaces, whereby, of course, underneath all the blockchain National Digital Ledger work sits underneath to enable things to manage things like citizenship, identity, and a whole bunch of other things. So, all right, yeah, I'll leave those questions there. And that takes us to, about an hour. So this has been a very good, productive conversation. I always love conversing with you. I really, again, I appreciate everything that you've done, to date. Really admire your work. And it's definitely an honor to be working with you on this project. And, together, hopefully, we can just start to bring more opportunities for Tuvalu, be an example for others in the Pacific region and, rest of the world. So, but with that, a last final thing, is there anything that you'd like to share with the audience? It could be something that you're working on soon, or it might even just be a piece of advice.
Yeah, well, thank you, George. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. I certainly learn a lot from our conversations that we have. Yeah, I'm not too sure if I have anything in mind at the moment to say to the audience, but yeah, thank you for the support. Thank you for those that are sending in questions. I'm always happy to answer them. And I guess we're just trying to work and do things to improve life for us here in Tuvalu, but also how that can also contribute to other people living other parts of the world. Yeah, I guess that's all. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. And to everyone listening, we'll probably have Simon on again later on when we've gone further in with the TNDL project. But yeah, feel free to subscribe to the channel on YouTube. You can find us also on Spotify or Apple iTunes. And thanks for tuning in. We'll speak again soon.